And welcome everyone. My name is Terry Giles. I'm the Executive Director of the Formosa Foundation. The Foundation's a 501c3 that focuses on strengthening ties between the United States and Taiwan. Our organization is dedicated to the advancement of democracy, human rights, and the right of self-determination. Today we are privileged to host a timely discussion regarding the upcoming elections in Taiwan, and we're honored that Senator Sherrod Brown has worked with us to make this special event possible. We're also grateful to the participation of Congressman Howard Berman, Congressman Ed Royce, and Congresswoman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, who will be joining us later this morning. Over the past year, we've seen tremendous interest and attention paid to Taiwan. The Foundation has worked with many members of Congress, not only to draw attention to the importance of Taiwan, but to ensure that we maintain and fortify that relationship. 2 hearings, bills in both the House and the Senate, and more support than we've seen in years. Why? Because Taiwan's democracy matters to the United States. Last September, in an address to the UN General Assembly, President Obama said, part of the price of our freedom is standing up for the freedom of others. Taiwan is a powerful symbol of the potential of democracy, and we need to stand firm in supporting the people of Taiwan. We must continue to support the Taiwanese people as they go to the polls and after they vote. We must send a clear message to those who would try to suppress the will of the people of Taiwan, and that the government of the United States fully supports their right to choose their own leaders. We must ensure that the Taiwan elections are free and fair. Standing up for freedom of others is the small price that we pay for our own freedom. That's what the President said, and that's what we believe. And today we're standing up for Taiwan. It is with great pride that I introduce to you our first speaker. Senator Brown is not only a champion for middle-class families in Ohio and for manufacturing across this country, but he is a champion for democracy and human rights around the world. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Senator Sherrod Brown.
Terry, thank you. It's a pleasure to be among friends again. Mike with FAPA, thank you, and Ambassador Wu, Professor Chen, thank you all for joining us and being part of what matters so much to so many of us in this institution. I remember I don't know how many years ago, at least a dozen years ago, when 4 of us in the House founded the Taiwan Caucus in the House, and we were always very careful, as all of you have been in the pro-democracy movement in Taiwan that are activists here also, in making sure this stays very bipartisan. I notice even today you'll have Congressman Berman, a Democrat, you'll have Congressman Royce, a Republican, and Congressman Ros-Lehtinen, the Republican chair of the International Relations Committee, all that kind of bipartisanship has served the Taiwanese community well and has served democracy well in Taiwan. My first trip to Taiwan was right around the time that martial law was lifted, and that was before I was a member of Congress. And in my visits to Taiwan, you can't help but think that that the miracle of Taiwan is many faceted. It's certainly what's happened with the economy in Taiwan in the last 25 years. It's also what's happened going from martial law in the days when some of you perhaps, and certainly some of your relatives, were imprisoned by a government that people weren't particularly proud of, to the kind of transition of power. This, I believe, will be the fifth presidential election coming up in January. We're fewer than 60 days away now. One of the marvels of watching a new maturing democracy is when one political party's voted out and another political party's voted in, and we see that transition peacefully, not happily for the party voted out, but certainly peacefully. My first week in my second week in the United States House of Representatives was January 20th, 1993, and I remember President Bush, first President Bush, walked out and sat down, and he was president when he walked out a little before noon, and President Clinton walked with him or behind him, and then when he walked out a few minutes later, there was a different president of the United States, and they had run against each other yet, and there was probably some tension between the two of them, but we saw that kind of transition as we see in mature democracies, and we really have seen that in Taiwan. Now, to me, the issue, though, is to make sure that we do everything we can as U.S. government officials, as activists, as people representing organizations and representing Taiwanese Americans, that we do all we can to make sure this election is fair. I don't make any accusations of either party. I don't make any accusations of President Ma. I don't make any accusations of DPP, but I do know that I have heard concerns about the fairness of this election. I've sent a letter to Secretary Clinton saying that our government should stay absolutely out of this and should stay neutral, should stay out of this. I know we do business with Taiwan. Our government does, as we should. I know American business does business with Taiwan, as we should. I just want to make sure that we're not doing business because it's President Ma with KMT any more than we were doing business because it was President Chen Shui-bian with DPP. We're doing business with the people and the government of the Republic of Taiwan. So that's important that we continue to understand that. My letter to Secretary Clinton, which, of course, the White House saw also, was that we make sure that we are showing no bias as a nation in those elections. And I have confidence that's what it will be. I have confidence it will be a fair election. I don't ever want to be alarmist about anything like that. But I urge all of you to do all you can to make sure that this election is run fairly, the votes are counted fairly. We go through this many times in my country, and we go through this many times, particularly in my state, which is Ohio is always considered, those of you that know American politics, most of you do, Ohio is always considered the swing state, and there's always some fears about votes being counted properly in Ohio. I think they have been. I think they will be. In Taiwan, I think it's our responsibility. You know what I think about Taiwanese politics, but it's not my role to interfere in this election either as an elected official in another country. So I wish you all well, and I know that we continue to work towards a prosperous miracle of Taiwan, a prosperous democratic country of Taiwan, and we continue to work towards one China, one Taiwan, one Tibet. That's what I care about. I care so much about human rights as you do. I care that, as Terry said, democracy in Taiwan matters to the democracy in the United States of America, that we do all we can to help the country of Taiwan continue to prosper. I want to see, as you know, I want to see ultimate membership in the WHO, membership in the UN, all the rights and privileges that go to independent countries in this world. That will continue to be my mission as we move towards one China, one Taiwan, one Tibet. So thank you for your activism, and thank you for your involvement, and thank you.
Well, I'm going to ask for your patience with us a little bit today. As you know, this is a very busy time here on Capitol Hill, and we're going to have members coming in and out, addressing the audience, or addressing you all, talking about this issue and participating in this event. But we don't know exactly when that's going to happen at all times. So what we're going to do is when a member of Congress comes in to make remarks, we're going to stop in what we're doing, and we're going to make some remarks. We'll also have a Q&A session with our panel, and we may have to interrupt that for Congresswoman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, who is chairing right now a hearing. And there are several hearings right now on the Hill. So we'll be, and unfortunately for us, several of the members that are speaking are on that Foreign Affairs Committee. That's fortunate or unfortunate. Today it's a little unfortunate, but we are pleased to have them with us. So we're going to start off our program, and I'm going to be introducing to you our moderator for this morning. Carolyn Bartholomew is with the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission. I'm sure many of you are familiar with her. She has been reappointed to the commission by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi for a 2-year term expiring in 2011. She has served as the commission's vice chairman in 2010, 8, and 6, respectively. Previously to that, to her work on the commission, she served in the U.S. Congress at senior levels as counsel, legislative director, and chief of staff to former House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi. She was also a professional staff member on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and served as a legislative assistant to then U.S. Representative Bill Richardson. It's my pleasure to have with us today Carolyn Bartholomew, who thankfully is going to moderate this in a much better way than I would have. So please welcome our moderator, Carolyn Bartholomew.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. Thanks, Terry, as always, for pulling together a wonderful group of speakers. I think that one thing Terry declined to say is that the fact that we have members of Congress coming here to speak at all at a time when they're so busy is really an indicator of how important Taiwan and Taiwan's elections are here in the United States. If they didn't care about this, if they didn't think it was important, they have plenty of other things they could be spending their time on. So I think we should be appreciative of both their leadership that they have exhibited over the years on behalf of Taiwan, and also the fact that they're taking time out of their busy schedules. So we'll be a little bit flexible today, and we'll figure this all out. I'm joining people here in helping to focus attention on Taiwan's upcoming elections. Taiwan is, of course, a leading light of democracy in Asia, and so we're all watching with interest to make sure that these elections are free and fair, because Taiwan continues to set the stage and set the tone for democracy in Asia. I think what I'm going to do is just call our panelists up and introduce them, and then they can go into their speeches, their presentations, and then we'll go ahead and have some questions and answers. And as Terry said, we'll stay flexible. But thank you all for joining us today. I know getting into the Capitol complex is not the easiest thing in the world. Nice to see you. Very nice to see you. Hi. Nice to see you. Now, most of the people up here don't even need introduction, but I'll go through the formalities of introducing them. First to speak today will be Louisa Cohen-Grieve, as I know her, from the National Endowment for Democracy, obviously a very important organization that helps to promote human rights and democratic values around the world. Louisa will be talking on the role of civil society. She is the Vice President for Asia, Middle East, and North Africa at NED, and also for multi-regional programs. It's a big title. I can fit it all on your card. She previously served there as Director for East Asia, Senior Program Officer, and Program Officer. She has served as a member of the Board of Directors, I did not know that, of Amnesty International from 1993 to 1998, and is currently serving on the Virginia State Advisory Committee of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. She received her BA in Asian Studies from Cornell University and a certificate in Chinese and American Studies from the Johns Hopkins University Nanjing University Center. The next person who speaks will be Dr. Joseph Wu, somebody who many of us have known for a number of years, from National Chengchi University. He's also representing here the International Committee for Fair Elections in Taiwan. He's going to speak on, to ensure a free and fair election in Taiwan, what needs to be done. He received his PhD in political science from the Ohio State University and is a research fellow at the Institute of International Relations at National Chengchi University in Taipei. He's concurrently serving as the convener of the National Security Division at Taiwan Brain Trust, a think tank in Taipei. Joseph is also a co-organizer of the International Committee for Fair Elections in Taiwan. He has extensive service in the Taiwan government, including as Deputy Secretary General to the President from 2002 to 2004, the Minister of Mainland Affairs from 2004 to 2007, and Taiwan's Ambassador to the United States from 2007 to 2008. I'm sure his comments will provide a lot of light for us on what's going on, and I'm certainly looking forward to hearing it. Sarah Cook, who's also joining us from Freedom House, is going to speak on Taiwan's elections and democratization from a regional perspective. She is a senior research analyst at Freedom House, also a leading light in promoting democratic freedoms around the world, and she's the assistant editor for the Freedom on the Net Index. Her research has covered human rights and media developments in China, Taiwan, other parts of East Asia, and the Middle East. Her comments and writings have appeared on CNN, the International Herald Tribune, the Taipei Times, and the U.S. Congressional Executive Commission on China. That's the other commission from mine. Before joining Freedom House, she co-edited the English translation of A China More Just, memoir by prominent rights attorney Gao Zhisheng, and was twice a delegate to the UN Human Rights Commission meeting in Geneva for an NGO working group on religious freedom in China. She received her BA in International Relations from Pomona College, and as a Marshall Scholar, she completed master's degrees in Middle East politics and public international law at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. And also, we're very pleased to have joining us today is Julian Baum, who's an independent journalist. He'll be speaking on ensuring free and fair elections in Taiwan 2012. He's a former Beijing and London bureau chief for the Christian Science Monitor in Boston and the Taipei bureau chief for the Far Eastern Economic Review, a publication which we all miss. He has extensive experience reporting on Taiwan's democratic transition, and he has observed every election there since 1989. So he has a wonderful perspective he'll be able to provide. Julian is now an independent writer based in Richmond, Virginia, and a frequent visitor to Taiwan and to East Asia. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and start.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. Before I get into some thoughts on the role of civil society in ensuring free and fair elections in Taiwan, I do want to add a few points on why it's really in everyone's interest to have a free and fair election in Taiwan, and in particular to look at the from the perspective of the Taiwanese people. I'm looking forward very much to hearing the additional members of Congress explaining the importance to America. All of your presence here today indicates the American interest in this, but why is it so much in the interest of all sides in Taiwan? Covering some basics. The well-being of Taiwanese society has to be fought for. Taiwan's material prosperity and its citizens' basic freedoms required a continued display of the amazing skill that the people of Taiwan have shown in the Taiwanese miracle over the last 30 years, playing from what is objectively a very weak hand. It's one of the smallest populations in Asia. It's got a small land area and does not have a formal international standing as a state, and of course is the target of a determined, multifaceted pressure from China, the largest country in the world, and now for a long time one of the fastest growing economies and militaries. So what strategic assets do the people of Taiwan and its leaders have to rely on to assure their own prosperous and free future? Certainly the economic strength that is the center of and deserves the admiration of people around the world, having a very solid place in the very top of the global elite in its per capita income and world trading ties. And this is an inherent incentive for other countries, private sector, and governments to continue to cooperate and work with the people of Taiwan for its prosperous and free future. But unfortunately, these other countries are also forced to compare the advantages of cooperation and support for Taiwan with the advantages of cooperation with China. A much bigger economy and even greater trading volumes around the world. So the PRCs, and on top of that, when you have the government of the PRC constructing what Shelley Rigger calls an international bird cage, which means it has a veritable army of well-disciplined diplomats explicitly and continually asking other sovereign states and even non-governmental actors to choose between the two of them. I'll just tell one story about that, how far this can go. I'm sure everyone has examples. My example has to do with an international gathering of Democrats around the world in Ukraine, Kiev, not necessarily a global center of anything happening in the world, but about 500 or 600 Democrats from non-governmental actors to some politicians, parliamentarians, and so on, planning to meet there a couple of years ago. And so the organizers had a meeting with the Foreign Ministry, the Consular Affairs Department in Kiev to make sure to smooth the way for visa applications from all kinds of obscure countries around the world. Let's make sure that the consulates around the world are prepared for these visa applications. And wanting to be very cooperative, the consular affairs officers assured the staff, absolutely no problem. We're welcoming everybody. Everything will be very smooth, no problem. Well, except for Taiwan. Unprompted, this was easily on the tip of the tongue of Ministry of Foreign Affairs staff in Kiev, well trained by this phalanx of diplomatic pressure on the part of the PRC. Do we need to take an interruption now? Yes, be glad to do that.
And I'll ask everybody's forbearance as we have members of Congress coming in. I want to introduce the really distinguished Howard Berman, who frankly needs no introduction for any of us here. He has been an extraordinary leader over his time in Congress on behalf of freedom and democracy around the world, a strong supporter of Taiwan. He's been representing California, your district only since 2003, is that correct?
No.
Then I have inaccurate information on here. I thought I could, for sure it had been, but I thought it was a lot longer than that. Sorry about that. He's now the ranking member, the lead Democrat of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, the former chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He has, as I said, been a long-time dominant voice for Taiwan's democracy. He has aggressively defended the Taiwan Relations Act and most recently authored the Berman-Connolly Amendment to the Foreign Relations Act, stating that the U.S. should continue arms sales to Taiwan. He co-chaired the hearing on Why Taiwan Matters, where he reiterated his strong support for Taiwan and for bolstering all aspects of the U.S.-Taiwan bilateral ties. It's really an honor to welcome Congressman Berman.
It's great when the politicians walk in so that the people who really know what they're talking about get interrupted so you can listen to us. I apologize. But I do want to thank the Formosa Foundation for inviting me here this morning to speak to you on the upcoming election in Taiwan. I'd just like to point out a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee staff and a real expert on a lot of issues involving Asia, including Taiwan. JJ over there is my his staff to the committee, and I want to acknowledge the Foundation's executive director, Terry Giles, who organized this conference, and for her work on Taiwan issues, both in Washington and in Los Angeles, a city I have a particular affection for, since that's where my district is. With the upcoming election in Taiwan now just over a month away, the people of Taiwan will once again exercise their democratic right to directly choose their president and legislative leaders. This election, like the ones that preceded it, symbolizes Taiwan's development over the last 60 years into a vibrant and flourishing multi-party democracy. The foundation of American ties with Taiwan is our common values and shared belief in democracy. I have been deeply impressed over the years by Taiwan's open and vibrant democratic society. I had a chance to meet with the two presidential candidates, President Ma when I visited Taiwan in 2009, and Democratic Progressive Party Chairwoman Tsai when she was in Washington this past September. The United States fully supports the Taiwanese people's right to directly choose their leaders, free from coercion and carried out in a fair and transparent manner. There is no role in a democratic society for corrupt practices or political violence aimed at disrupting electoral choices, nor should there be any external political intimidation or military threats from mainland China. I'm pleased to learn that an international committee consisting of outside experts has been created to draw attention to next month's election. The committee was formed by my good friend Li Pei Wu, a Los Angeles fellow, to raise awareness in the international community about the importance of further enhancing Taiwan's democracy. I want to be clear that it is not my place nor Congress's, nor this administration's place to support or imply support for either presidential candidate or political party in Taiwan in the upcoming election. As Assistant Secretary of State Kurt Campbell stated at the committee hearing that was referenced in my introduction back in October, the United States does not take sides in Taiwan's election. I'm a firm supporter of Taiwan's democracy. I want to assure you that the United States will respect the choice of that the Taiwanese people make next month and will continue to support them, no matter who is elected. Following the election, the United States should quickly congratulate the winner of the presidential election in January, as both the Taiwan people and mainland Chinese government be looking to Washington's reaction. Some may be concerned that the 4-month transition period following the election and before the presidential inauguration in May could present some challenges to the process of a peaceful transfer of power between outgoing President Ma and the incoming president-elect if DPP candidate Dr. Tsai were to win. We will be watching to see if Beijing tries to meddle in this process, either by pressuring the lame duck administration for any concessions or taking a strident or hostile stance toward the incoming president. Next month's election in Taiwan is not only important to the Taiwanese people, but also for the region and for the United States. Taiwan's example is an inspiration for other countries in Asia and throughout the world that linger under the control of one person or one party. This election is yet another sign of the political maturity of the people of Taiwan and a signal to Beijing that a change in relations between Taiwan and China cannot be imposed by the mainland. Again, my congratulations to the people of Taiwan for what they have created. Thank you very, very much.
These kinds of changes in our schedule are what we're looking forward to, not an interruption at all. So from the point of view of Taiwan, boxed in by the PRC's birdcage diplomacy, with its powerhouse economy nonetheless overshadowed by China's super powerhouse economy, what are the strategic assets that Taiwan should rely on, can rely on, in determining its own future? And putting aside military and strategic considerations, clearly the shared values of the people of Taiwan and its achievements in building a democracy in a place, in fact, being the first Chinese culture to do so, and one of the first in all of Asia, has to be a jealously guarded treasure. Think about what would have happened had Taiwan not had this democratic transformation over the last 3 decades. It certainly would have far fewer international friends and a far harder time securing the interests of its people in dealings beyond its shores. So this democratic transformation compels in a fundamental way the attention and concern of the world, despite some of the odds against Taiwan on these other dimensions. In a crisis, if it were a choice between an authoritarian Taiwan and an authoritarian PRC, what would there be to choose from? But if democratic China needs assistance from the international world, if there is a conflict of some dimension with the authoritarian PRC, clearly the democracies of the world, certainly the U.S. Foremost among them, are compelled to give far greater weight to the interests of the Taiwanese people and the positions taken by its legitimately elected leaders. So there can't be any question that that democratic transformation is a core strategic asset of Taiwan, and therefore it must be carefully guarded. So maintaining a credible and solid democratic system is essential to the future of Taiwan. Every time Taiwan slips in the international rankings on media freedoms, on international perceptions of the quality of its parliamentary system, on the quality of its elections, this in fact is a danger to Taiwan's essential interests, and all the more reason why we do need to put energy into this issue. But is that democracy in danger? Has there been slippage in the quality of democracy in Taiwan? I hope other panelists will give some specifics. I do want to talk about 2 areas where there is a strong role for civil society in helping to shore up the credibility and solidity of Taiwan's democracy. Clearly, partisanship is one of those things that can erode the civility and quality of democracy. Of course, it's an issue in the U.S. that people frequently comment on. Intense partisanship, however, must nonetheless be confined within the democratic rules of the game if it's not to lead to an overall erosion of either deliberately or as an unintended consequence to a breakdown even at the edges of an entire system. So the high stakes of this upcoming election are one reason why we all need to pay attention, and they are causing genuine concern. I have heard quite a few people in Taiwan quite concerned about this, for example, the 4-month window, which is a new development, a new feature. Some DPP circles go so far as to raise some extremely far-fetched scenarios. I've talked with 2 officials, to be frank, who have said to me they're concerned that with this period, should the KMT lose, the incumbent government may go to extremes to manipulate that period, call a national emergency, use some extra constitutional means to delay or avoid handing over power. So that I say this not because I think that's a possibility, but because it's an indication of the extreme fears that the intense competition is raising. And so it is a sharp partisan divide. It will be a close election. This is always difficult to handle. The point here is that it is in the interests of both sides, for the national interests, to ensure that they will all benefit. Either side, whichever one wins, will greatly benefit in their governance mandate and their leadership of the country if the other side has no basis for questioning the legitimacy of the administration of the election and the legitimacy of the vote. So this hyper-partisan tension is bad for governance. It's also bad for the acceptance of the outcomes of votes. So partisan conflict over an unfair election administration would be a matter for great concern. What can civil society do? Certainly around the elections, nonpartisan election monitoring efforts, I hope we'll hear more about some of them now, will be a great help. Taiwan is not in the position of newly emerging democracies where formal international election observation is a normal practice to help support fairness and competent administration and careful adjudication of disputes over the counting, over announcement of the outcomes, and over campaign violations. Nonetheless, through informal efforts and various other kinds of nonpartisan watchdog efforts, vocal and clear enunciation of what some of the concerns might be before, during, and after, of course, is helpful for supporting clean elections. Then there are 2 other institutional areas of the Taiwanese democratic system that have long been a matter of concern and do impinge on elections. One is the area of the media, and the other area has to do with the independence of the judiciary. So these are my last 2 topics. In the area of the media, again, partisanship is a huge concern. Overall, I believe it's fair to say that Taiwanese media emerged from the period of martial law and one-party rule with rapid improvement and flourishing of a vibrant, pluralistic press with greatly increasing standards of professionalism that reached a plateau in the 1990s, many people feel, and in fact certain other factors have taken over to stop the improved development of the press as a way to inform people about civic issues and as an area for debate over political competition, and some people say it's even deteriorating. Sensationalism, of course, is the bane of modern media, but it is true, too much of what you see in the mainstream media in Taiwan is a pastiche of out-of-context headlines, collection of rumors and unsourced accusations. It's too high a proportion compared to what a modern press in such a well-developed country should look like. Corruption, of course, there's holdover issues of the old habits not being completely eradicated, and of course this is not an uncommon problem around the world. Overt partisanship and influence, and this would include refraining from investigative reporting in scandals on your own side. So it's not to say that there's something about, for example, under the Ma administration, something particularly wrong about the media. The partisan pressure works where some of the partisan media during the last DPP administration would refrain from reporting on issues that might make their own side look bad. So this is a bipartisan flaw. Of course, people are worried about mainland interests influencing the quality and vibrancy and diversity of Taiwan media, in the sense partly through potentially direct political interference, and partly because commercial or corporate owners may have business interests in the mainland and therefore self-censor or manage their own media in such a way as to not offend and not harm their interests in the mainland, always a concern. So overall, this adds up to the potential for a very bad scene, and in fact, there's by some measures, the media really is not in very good shape. Mainstream media, one survey found that the credibility of mainstream media was, full confidence among the population was at 1%. But not all the news is bad. Certainly alternative and citizen media are thriving, partly in response to a perception of the unreliability of the mainstream press. Some citizen journalists are coming into their own there, as they are elsewhere in the world. One watchdog effort has 7,000 citizen journalists registered to help work on accountability on certain contentious public works projects. So it's fair to conclude that the citizens and the consumers of media are not happy with the situation. They're taking matters into their own hand. These efforts ought to be encouraged. And certainly there are also increasingly professional media watchdog groups. I'm hoping maybe Sarah may be able to mention some of them if she has time. So all these efforts are worthwhile. They are actually a normal feature of democracy. It's not necessarily a sign of extreme failure in Taiwan of the media sector to act responsibly in this open democratic system, but it's a matter of finding a balance to correct for elements that tend toward unprofessionalism and unreliability of media that in turn may help or encourage rather than curb partisanship that may infect politics and to contribute to the potential for deterioration of democratic institutions. And then finally, with the judiciary, certainly the high-profile cases of corruption cases, sending the former president and his relatives to prison. We all know about the concerns about selective prosecution, bias in the investigation and adjudication and even sentencing in these cases. Certainly these are a matter of concern. But the bigger question, this is not the whole story. We really ought to be ready to acknowledge the strong basis for a very professional and well-administered judicial system, and then support those efforts from within the system and from outside the system to strengthen it. So this is not something you can do at the time of elections. It's something that needs to be on a long-term basis. Civil society, I'm putting professional standards in the category of civil society so that lawyers and judges and the judicial education system all have their role to play in pressing for accountability, raising standards, and aiming for consistency and to eliminate the potential for biased outcomes to stand unchallenged. And in the same way, there are groups outside the judicial system, not within the legal profession, but outside it, who nonetheless are forming independent groups and are planning, working on, and one hopes able to expand and do year after year systematic surveys to point out to the profession itself and to other actors where there are flaws, where there is bias, so that overall the independence of the judiciary and its non-political role in the society can be strengthened. And this is a long-term task, something that, again, I would encourage civil society in Taiwan and, of course, international friends of democracy in Taiwan to really pay attention to and support in a very specific way. It's not enough to make noise at election time, but rather to work on these institutional improvements in between elections. Thank you.
Thank you, Louisa, for a very interesting discussion. And people, if you can hold your questions, we'll have questions of all the panelists at the end. I'd like to just pick up on a couple of themes, both that Louisa raised and also that Congressman Berman raised, because I think it's really important as we look at really Taiwan's extraordinary success over the course of the past 30 years. This election is not just about Taiwan's responsibility to the people of Taiwan, but Taiwan really has global responsibilities in all of this. The world is at a time of transition, and there are a lot of places, particularly in the Middle East, that are making these transitions towards democracy. And people, I think, particularly young people, are looking for models, and they're looking to see how things work. So ensuring that Taiwan has, in this election, a legitimate election, free and fair elections, and should the party in power lose, a peaceful transition of power is very important, not just in the region, but around the world. I want to emphasize, of course, the fact of the shared values between the United States, people of the United States, and the people of Taiwan, and emphasize something that Congressman Berman said, which is that it is up to the people of Taiwan who they elect. No one outside Taiwan should be engaged in trying to interfere in what's going on in these elections, be that mainland China or be that people in the administration in the United States. So all of these themes, I think, are things that we're going to be hearing about as the day goes on. I'd like to introduce Dr. Wu, who's going to speak to us about to ensure a free and fair election in Taiwan, what needs to be done. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Caroline. Distinguished fellow panelists and distinguished guests over here. I'm delighted to be able to come over here to Washington, D.C. again to meet with new friends or old friends to discuss some of the issues that we are all concerned about. That is the fairness of the election in Taiwan. As you all know, we're going to have a presidential election together with a parliamentary election on January 14th next year. And in the process, we hope that the election can be handled in a way that the observers from the international community would describe as a fair and free election. Taiwan has been democratized for quite a few years. According to a very well-known political scientist, Samuel Huntington, if there's two peaceful turnover of political power, then that country can be described as a democracy consolidated. And Taiwan has gone through the first peaceful transfer of power in 2000 and another transfer of power in 2008. And according to Huntington's theory, Taiwan should be a consolidated democracy. But there are still people who see the fragileness of Taiwan's democracy. For example, Taiwan's martial law was not lifted until 1987, and in 1996 we had the first presidential election. So Taiwan's democracy is still young. In the past few years, we also saw indications that the spirit of the past authoritarianism is still there. And some of the things that are being described by Louisa already. For example, the judicial system is being used to pursue the opposition, or the media is suffering a setback in the degree of freedom, and I'm sure Sarah is going to discuss more in this regard. And therefore, there's a whole lot to be watched out for to ensure that Taiwan's democracy stays democratic. And in the upcoming presidential election, this is one wonderful opportunity to see whether the problems we see in the past few years in terms of the rolling backwardness of Taiwan's democracy or democratic development can be corrected. And I'm sure we all have a very high interest in make sure that Taiwan's democracy can stay on its course or correct its course to make sure that Taiwan stays democratic. Taiwan's indeed a democracy, even though there are still people who doubt on the quality of that democracy. Political leaders, including the president or the legislative leaders, have gone through periodical elections. And according to the definition of democracy, Taiwan is already a democracy, and I don't doubt on that. And I think this is one fact that is most important to the United States. The United States has been stressing that the promotion of freedom and democracy and human rights is a fundamental foreign policy, or the keystone or cornerstone of its foreign policy. And since Taiwan has been a democracy, and I think that proves that the U.S. foreign policy can have a success. And since Taiwan is a successful democracy, we hope that the United States can continue to support and safeguard Taiwan's democracy. And I think during the past few years, we see arguments coming out in Washington, D.C. or in the United States in general, talking about ditching Taiwan or abandoning Taiwan or scrapping Taiwan Relations Act. And during this kinds of period of time, the U.S. commitment to Taiwan's democracy is going to be very important, because American allies in East Asia are watching whether the United States is committed to the support of democracy. Even though Taiwan is already a democracy, and as I described a little bit earlier, Taiwan can be seen as a consolidated democracy. But because Taiwan's democracy is young, we still saw some violence or anti-democratic incidences took place in the last few elections. For instance, in 2004 election, there was an attempt against the president and vice president. And last year in the 5 municipal elections, there was also a shooting incident. And according to one of the elected mayor, the shooting incident seemed to have increased at least 100,000 votes for him. And therefore, you can see that those kinds of unhappy, anti-democratic incidents can have some impact over the election. And we certainly hope that the United States, particularly the Congress of the United States, can stay vigilant to watch out that none of those anti-democratic attempts can succeed to influence the results of the election or to distort the process of the election. And in the past couple of incidences, I cannot recall that the U.S. government came out to condemn those type of actions, and we certainly hope that the U.S. government can stay vigilant to come out if any of those unhappy moments came. The U.S. can come out in a very strong way to condemn those violence, to make sure to the Taiwanese people that the United States is standing together with Taiwan's democracy. And again, because Taiwan is a young democracy, there were remnants of past authoritarianism. And just a few weeks ago, we saw some military leaders who were quite prominent when Taiwan was still under martial law, came out in a very open way to praise martial law in a very martial law type of language. And I think this still shows that we haven't fully gotten rid of those past authoritarianism. And we certainly hope that the international observers can stay vigilant against any anti-democratic elements in Taiwan to make sure that Taiwan's democratic process is not distorted. China certainly is a very important factor. In 1996, when we had the first direct presidential election, China resorted to the use of military exercise and missile threat against Taiwan, hoping that would affect Taiwan's voting behavior. And in the elections, particularly presidential elections afterward, China continued to use different kinds of tactics to influence Taiwan's election. And in this particular election, we already saw news report that the Chinese government is going to offer very cheap airfare for the Taiwanese businessmen operating in China to come back to Taiwan and vote. And I think that kind of vote-buying activities is certainly against Taiwan's law. And we hope that the international observers can stay vigilant in this regard as well. We shouldn't allow an authoritarian China to dictate or to influence our democratic operation in Taiwan. China's military pressure against Taiwan is one element that affects Taiwan-U.S. relations or Taiwan-China relations, or affects the general peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait area. We certainly see that China has been continuing to build up its military force, to deploy its military force against Taiwan specifically. And people in Taiwan also feel that China wanted to use these kinds of military threat against Taiwan in order to change Taiwan's voting behavior, and this is certainly not allowed. Especially Taiwan is already a democracy and is an ally of values with the United States, and we hope that the United States can stay in a very clear way that the United States would not tolerate China use force to threaten Taiwan's democratic election. And I think the U.S. language can balance off the negative effect of the Chinese military threat against Taiwan. And we also hope that the United States Congress can be a very strong force behind Taiwan's democratic election. As we all know, the administrations in the United States after the Second World War continue to advocate democracy as the most important objective of American foreign policy. And since Taiwan is already a democracy, that deserves the American special attention. And I think that the Congress of the United States should urge the administration to continue to support Taiwan's democracy or to prevent the administration to take any action or making any statement that will be seen as supporting any particular candidate or particular camp. For doing so, will be seen as the collaborator of the Chinese government or an action that is similar to what the Chinese government is trying to do to Taiwan. Just not long ago, there was a National Security Council official giving interview to the Financial Times indicating that one particular candidate seems to be not in the U.S. favor. And I think that's a gross violation of Taiwan's free election. And we hope that that kind of unforgivable evidences cannot occur again. And in this regard, I hope the Congress of the United States can continue to urge the administration side to stay neutral. But I must say that we are highly appreciative that Assistant Secretary Kurt Campbell in his congressional hearing has already indicated that the United States is going to work with democratically elected government. And the AIT in Taipei has also came out in a very strong way to show to the Taiwanese people that the United States is going to stay neutral in the process of Taiwan's election. And we hope the kind of languages or actions to show that the United States is neutral in Taiwan's election can stay the same way. And as Louisa talked about a little bit earlier, there are people in Taiwan who are very concerned that the election can be manipulated during this period or in the transition period if the opposition is to come to power. Especially there are still anti-democratic elements in Taiwan, and we certainly don't hope that the election results are distorted or reversed by some of those anti-democratic elements in Taiwan. And in this regard, some senior people in Taiwan are working with some prominent international figures to work out or to organize an international committee on fair election in Taiwan. And the leader for this committee is going to be Professor Pemimin. I'm sure many of you have already known him. And honorary chair of this committee is going to be former President Lee Teng-hui. And there will be many prominent international figures to join this international committee. And the committee will be launched on December 15th. And this will be a high time for us to know that there are international concerns about the fairness of the election in Taiwan. Taiwan's election, at least in previous practices, are something that we are very proud of. People going to the voting booths, and then right after the polling time is closed at 4 o'clock p.m., the votes started to be counted. And in presidential election, it's about 2 to 3 hours that we already know the results of the election. And this is a normal practice. And we hope that the international community can understand that this is a normal process in Taiwan's election. And if there's going to be any delay or delay of the announcement or delay of the counting of the votes, this can be some problem for us to watch out for. And whenever the elected leader is already known. We certainly hope that the U.S. government or the U.S. Congress can send out congratulatory messages right away to ensure to the Taiwanese people that the U.S. is solidly behind Taiwan's democracy and democratic process. We want to ensure that the peaceful transfer will take place right after the election. And the U.S. can play a very important role in this regard. We also hope that the previous practice of AIT chairperson or AIT director in Taipei will present congratulatory messages directly to the president-elect in Taipei. We certainly hope that it can be conducted in an open way so that people in Taiwan understand that this is taking place. During the transition period, we are also concerned that China might do something to show its displeasure because one or a candidate that is elected is not to in this election process. But we hope that the U.S. can stay vigilant of this kind of situation to make sure that the people in Taiwan feel the strong support of the United States. And we certainly hope that the United States can also dispatch special envoys to Taiwan, repetition of previous practice in 2000, to make sure that the newly elected administration in Taiwan can fully cooperate with the United States in all regards. And we certainly hope that the Congress can continue to show its support of Taiwan's democracy by come out individually or collectively sending congratulatory messages to the Taiwan people or the president-elect that Taiwan has gone through a democratic process, a very successful democratic process. And we also hope that congressmen can visit Taiwan individually or collectively to make sure to the Taiwanese people that the Congress of the United States will continue to support Taiwan's democracy. Thank you very much.